In our previous study, the Apostle Paul talked about Christian ministry. And in that study, we talked about the fact that it wasn't not a fact, that it was a question that God had called us and ordained us and given us a ministry to share the gospel, to share the good news of Christ to a lost and dying world, and those who are not churched and unchurched or dechurched. No longer can we just sit aimlessly to satisfy ourselves, because God intended for us to be about the Father's business. The church is the only organization in the world that I know of that is entirely for the sake of those who are not members. You say, well, that makes me kind of feel left out. No, it doesn't. I preach to you every Sunday morning the Word of God, and every Sunday night and Wednesday night the Word of God. But my goal, my desire, my mission here is to equip you to be able to share Christ with a lost and dying world. Now, if you aren't doing that, there's one or two things wrong. I'm either failing miserably in my ministry, or you're failing in what God's called you to do. Naturally, then, in this sequence of thoughts that Paul is sharing in his second letter to the church in Corinth, having exposed to us the real nature of the ministry and what's involved in ministry, he now tells us how he receives strength for the battle. And that's what we all need to know. There's a thing called, a program out today called Wounded Warriors. And it's for veterans that have been involved in battle for our nation. Not too many years ago, there was a book came out called Wounded in His Service. And it's for preachers and how preachers end up wounded in their service and how they quit the ministry because of discouragement and this kind of stuff. If the ministry that God has called us to means anything at all, it involves two or three things. It involves, first of all, the fact that we have been called to salvation, which in that call involves us a call to ministry. Secondly, it involves a relying on the Holy Spirit. He's the one that's going to strengthen us and equip us and then give us the endurance for the battle. But then day by day, you and I are going to experience the principle of the cross if we're going to receive strength for the battle. And so, what is the secret for motivation in my life and in your life? I've just given it to you. Those are the answers that we're going to try to study tonight. It's fascinating to notice that Paul describes this battle in verse 17 of 2 Corinthians chapter 4. He says, "For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, works for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory." This is what Paul says that ministry is to him. Ministry says to Paul, and Paul conveys to us, it's a light affliction. It's the trouble with so many people is that it's affliction. Paul said that dealing with people and dealing with religious leadership and dealing with the enemy is an affliction. He said, and it has seemed so great that sometimes he has been down but not out. There have been many casualties in ministry. Some in mission fields, some in home ministry, and some in Christian testimonies. The battle has been hot, and it's been hard, and the enemy fire has been too heavy for far too many pastors and far too many missionaries around the world. But Paul speaks of his struggles as only a light affliction. But what's he saying? Well, listen to how he describes these light afflictions, all right? He says in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 23 through 28, Are they ministers of Christ? He's talking about how these folk are dealing with him. I speak as a fool. I am more. In labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prisons more frequent, in death often. Of the Jews 5 times received I 40 stripes, save one. 3 times I was beaten with rods, once I was stoned. 3 times I suffered shipwreck day and night. I have been robbed in the deep. I have been in the deep, of journeys often in perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils in the cities, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness, in painfulness, in watchings often, in hunger and in thirst, in fastings, in cold and in nakedness, beside those things that are without, that which comes upon me daily, the care of all the churches. Paul said all of that he describes as light afflictions. Wow. Paul was not free from the reality of suffering in life. He could speak about his thorn in the flesh, and we'll talk about that at a later time if we haven't already dealt with it, because it'll come up again. But this light affliction, as he calls it, is the realm of suffering came to him simply because he was a Christian in an unchristian world. It's the kind of thing that he expects. And I think sometimes it's the kind of thing that we don't expect when we take a stand for Christ. When we are determined to stand for what is right and make up our minds to go against the norm, against the flow of tradition, when we by faith take on the life and the character of Christ and allow our life to be governed in light of eternity, from that moment on, there is the great possibility of affliction in our life. And so that's the kind of thinking that Paul has in mind. That's what he's talking about. And yet, all that he went through was not really necessary. He could have avoided and escaped it all. And so could you, and so can I. But if he was to be true to his master, if he was to be real in his Christian profession, inevitably and constantly is much more to him. It's what he calls in his life light afflictions. It's sometimes come to me in our lives how it makes a difference in our life when we think no one's looking. Not long ago, well, it's been a long time ago, let me rephrase that. We were with our family in a restaurant. And wherever we are at a meal, we all of us hold hands, and then we have a blessing. And if you don't hold hands and have a blessing, Sophie reminds us that we didn't hold hands and have a blessing. And we were in a restaurant not too terribly long ago, and we got our salads and everything, and we were talking, and everybody was piddling around with their salad, and Sophie just sat there, and she looked around, and she said, "Paul, is nobody going to pray?" I said, "Yeah, I think I am." So we reached over and got everybody's hand, and I said the blessings, and just a moment, a server came by and gave us a note. And the note was from somebody that was sitting almost on the far side of the restaurant that saw us. And the guy said, "Thank you for being straight in a crooked world." And that made such an impact on my life, because the truth of the matter is, guys, we never know when someone is looking that we can be an encouragement to by simple little things that may be an encouragement to them. Because we know that there are things in most of our lives that are inedible. I mean, this is true. Sometimes we talk about things that's going on around us and things that we're involved in, Listen, let me be honest with you. That's just life. Life is not fair. No one ever said that life was fair. Relationships aren't fair. Friendships aren't fair. Life is giving and taking, and you're experiencing pain and disappointment and disillusionment. That's what life is all about. Cars break down, washers go out, stoves burn up, refrigerator ice makers quit working. All of that's just life, you know? I mean, you stump your toe, you wreck your bike. All of that's just life. It just happens. You know, I mean, that's just the way this goes. But here's the deal. Paul wasn't talking about all of that. He was talking about things that happened to him in his life because he was willing to take a stand for the cause of Christ. Somebody said, well, how long do you have to deal with these light afflictions? Paul dealt with them his entire life. From the time that he received Christ on the Damascus Road, the Apostle Paul struggled with being accepted. He was an outcast by the Jews, and he was an outcast by the Gentiles. The Jews hated him, and the Gentiles were afraid of him. And yet, he had one of the greatest ministries of any man, I'm confident, in all of the scriptures, second only to Jesus Christ himself. You see, if you and I, in the name of the Lord, declared ourselves on his side, that has meant for me to renounce sin, the renouncing of my greater self, and the beginning of life as a ministry. Now let me tell you something, guys. I've told our staff, and I tell them this all the time. Ministry is a life of interruptions. Ministry is a life of interruptions. And I'm going to tell you tonight, if you're going to live a life of ministry, you're going to live a life of interruptions. Because there is no schedule for people who are hurting. There's no schedule for death. There's no schedule for sickness. There's no schedule for all the things that people go through in life. And you never know when you're going to encounter someone who is in desperate need of just simple word of encouragement. But all of this, how long? Ever how long it is short compared to eternity. Isn't that right? Absolutely. Not only that, but Paul talks about his affliction as a transforming affliction. Wow. He sounds a lot like James. Listen to what Paul says. In verse 17, he says that it works for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. Notice the conflict and the contrast that Paul is talking about here. He talks about affliction. He talks about glory. He talks about light affliction. He talks about weight of glory. He talks about light affliction that is but for a moment. And he talks about the weight of eternal glory. So what I want you to see what Paul is saying here is the word weight. The word weight that Paul is using here in the Greek is a word that obviously has to do with heaviness. But it also has to do with the weights that are placed on a scale. Paul is saying that the light affliction to those of us, you and me, who experience in this life because we have decided to serve God more than the world, to those who are those constant attacks that are coming from without, sometimes from within, ultimately are coming from the enemy. Paul says you need to understand that people are not your enemy. Your family is not your enemy. Your workplace is not your enemy. These are people who most of the time, unbeknowingly, are being used by the enemy. Excuse me. They are simply pawns on the chessboard of life. Okay? So Paul said you need to understand that. When you understand that, then you'll understand that these attacks are expected. I hope that our church is filled with capacity in February, in March and April and June. I don't ever how long it's going to take me to teach through that book on deliverance from demonic oppression. I found some mistakes in it. Well, actually, let me rephrase that. I found a mistake in it, and I asked my wife to proof it for me, and she found the rest of them. So now I'm in the process of correcting what I had mistyped, and then I'll get it back to David and Jan and everybody for them to get it ready. But one of the great tragedies that I think that I have encountered in ministry is the fact that God normally, not always, normally, in church gets blamed, and outside of church gets blamed for all the horrendous things going on in the world. Why did God let this happen? Okay? Why did God let this happen to us? Well, not next Sunday, but the next Sunday we're going to talk about why bad things happen to good people. All right? But this is how Paul describes the battle. And I look more closely at what he says. He gives us the secret of his deliverance, from where he gets his strength. Paul tells us he found it because he looked somewhere. Look at verse 18. While we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal. The Greek word translated look here is an interesting word, and it doesn't mean that I'm just taking a casual glance over at Clyde ever so often, or over at Keith, or over at Gary, or what. No. It means that I am looking intently in focus. It suggests an intense examination, a constant scrutiny, a steady gaze. Paul is saying that my focus, my gaze, my attention is not on the things of this world, because the things of this world are only temporary. Are you listening to what he's saying? Do you hear me tonight? Listen, guys. Listen to me carefully. Most of the things that we allow to control our lives are simply passing. They're temporary. They're not going to be here. They're not going to last. We're temporary. That house that we put all of our time and effort and money is temporary. It's deteriorating almost as fast as we can repair it. Our clothes are temporary. Our cars are temporary. All of these things that we're trying to build up in this world are temporary. Paul said these things that I can see and touch and feel are all temporary. They're passing. He said the things that are eternal we cannot see with these eyes. But the eternal things become more clear to us. Is that true? Absolutely. In verses 13 and 14, he says, we have the same spirit of faith according as it is written, I believe and therefore I have spoken. We also believe and therefore speak, knowing that he which raised up the Lord Jesus shall raise us also up by Jesus and shall present us to you. In essence, the Apostle Paul is saying I have looked into the face of my Lord. I believe when Paul was writing this scripture, he was referring back to the time that he was left for dead. I believe that's the time when Paul talked about he was in the out-of-body experience. He was taken up into paradise, and he saw things that was unlawful for him to speak. You remember those words that Paul was talking about? Paul said, I've looked into the face of my Lord. I'm paraphrasing all that he's saying. And I have looked at this earthly life. And I think he's saying, as I had the opportunity to gaze into heaven, and because of this, because of my looking, because of my realization, I have a faith like they had in Old Testament times. As they believed, so I believe, and I therefore speak. I have been gripped by the same spirit of faith. I have been convicted that the same God who raised Christ from the dead is going to raise me also together with you. And one day we're going to meet again in heaven and stand beside each other as we have ministered to each other here on this earth. We're going to stand together before the judgment seat of Christ, give an account of the things we've done in our bodies. And because of this, I can never be the same again. No longer can I hold trust in a mere theory. No longer can I simply discuss the correctness of doctrine. I have been gripped by the reality that one day I am going to meet God face to face. I'm going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ, and you will stand there with me. Child of God, it may be tomorrow, but one day you and I are going to stand together at the judgment seat of Christ. The good news is that it's going to be a blessed day, but it's going to be a disappointing day. You say, well, how can you be disappointed if you're in the presence of God? Well, that's where our works are going to be judged. It's the judgment seat of Christ. At the judgment seat of Christ, we're going to receive rewards for what we have done on this earth in this body for the glory of the Lord Jesus. You see, the Bible makes it clear, and Paul makes it clear in his writings, that a lot of the things that we do in this life are flesh-oriented. A lot of the things we do for the praise of men. A lot of the things we do is for the favor of men. Paul said those things that we do in the name of Christ aren't going to be rewarded, because you will receive your own selfish gratification when people pat you on the back and shake your hand and tell you how great you are, how awesome you are. Some of the greatest rewards that you and I will ever get in heaven, men will never know about until they get to the judgment seat of Christ and are spectators at that judgment. You understand what I'm saying? It's those little things. It's that phone call. It's that time that God woke you up at night in the wee hours of the morning and you prayed for someone and you didn't know why. You called a name out to the Lord and you didn't know why. God put a burden on your heart and you didn't know what. It's those times that men never see. Only God sees those times. It's that time that you sat down at your table. You didn't tell your husband or your wife or your children. You just simply wrote out a little card. And it said simply this: God put you on my heart today, and I want you to know I'm praying for you. And for the cost of a stamp and the cost of a little card, you made someone's day. Men didn't know that. People don't see that. Those are the little things that God is going to give you honor for at the judgment seat of Christ. Some of the greatest ministries that are going to take place in this life today aren't in pulpits. They aren't on podiums like this. Some of the greatest ministries that are taking place in the church of the living Christ today are behind the scenes. People who are committed, people who are praying, people who are fasting, people who are waiting, people who are standing in faith, who are believing God for healings for someone else, not themselves. It's people who are rejoicing in a worship service when they don't even feel like lifting up a hand. They don't feel like taking another step. And yet somehow the Holy Spirit moves in their life. And they are willing to hold up a hand or say amen. Or just get involved in a praise service. When really they would rather be at home just trying to deal with their own pain and their own self. These are the kind of people that we're going to see rejoicing and casting their crowns at the Master's feet. It's not going to be those of us so much that's in the limelight. It's going to be you. It's going to be you that's behind the scenes. Because why? You've committed your life to the ministry that God has called you to. Now look at verse 16. He says, for which cause? Because of that, he says. Because of that cause, we don't faint. But though our outward man perish, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. What's he saying? There are times, guys, when we want to give up. Are you listening to me? There are times in your life. There are times in your ministry. There are times in your job. I would venture to say there have been times in your marriage. There have been times in relationships that you wanted to give up. But you knew that wasn't God's will for your life. It was in those times that we have to be renewed. We have to wait on the Lord. Listen to what the scripture said in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 31. They that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with the wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Although it's true that the years are passing and I'm not the man I used to be, it's also true that every day of my life, every night of my life that I talk to the Lord, I ask him to renew my strength, to renew my vision, to renew my call, to cause me to be the man that he wants me to be, until one foot cannot move before the other, and I have no voice left in my throat. I have no heart left that beats for a lost and dying world. Until that day, I am committed to be what God has called me to be and to do what God has called me to do. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you tonight that God didn't call me to be a quitter. And I'm sorry. If you think I'm going to get on my Harley and ride off into the sunset, you're sadly mistaken. It's not going to happen. And I know most people think I'm crazy. My wife thinks I'm pretty well that way, but that's just a rumor she's bought into somehow or another. But I've told her time and time again, I know it's going to cause a stir. But my greatest dream is to be able to be preaching so hard that I have a heart attack and die while I'm preaching. That's what God called me to do. I want to be doing what he's called me to do when I don't have another breath left in my body. Now, it may not happen that way. You know, it may not happen. I may cut another wheelie then, you know, and yeah. And then if that one doesn't kill me, trust me, if she's in the ambulance with me to the emergency room, when we get there, I'll be dead. Don't even go down there. Just call the sheriff's department and tell them that she's killed me on the way down there. So what happened to that knife cut in his chest? Well, he evidently had one on the motorcycle. One of the greatest joys that you and I ever have in this life is living the life that God has called us to live, to fulfill the purpose that he's given us in this life. This is the solution, this is the formula that I tell every young preacher that I've ever talked to, and I've talked to a lot of young preachers. I talk to a lot of preachers that most people don't know I talk to. You know why? Because most preachers don't call their buddies. They'll call me. Because they know I don't talk to their buddies because their buddies don't talk to me. Huh? But if they need somebody to pray with them, if they need somebody to talk to, they know they can call me. But this is what I tell most young people. Now listen, guys, and get this. Start where you are. Use what you have. And do it for his glory. Start where you are. Use what you have. And do it for his glory. Now I'm going to give you a biblical example. This is extra. You get this for free. You don't even have to pay for this. One day there was a young man who was the herder of sheep. His brothers were in a battle against the Philistines. And his father said to him, I want you to take this little lunch bucket here. And I want you to take your brothers some lunch and come back and let me know how they're doing. And this young man went over to the battlefield. And he saw all his brothers hunkered down behind a big rock. And all the warriors on the other side laughing. And there was a big Philistine in the middle. You and I know that Philistine is Goliath. And he was mocking David's God. David never intended to go to battle that day. He never dreamed that that would be a day that would change his life. That would change his nation. That would change his perspective on the power and the anointing of God. But when he got there, he used what he had. He told his brothers and the king, why isn't anybody attacking that man that's attacking my God? And they said, you need to be quiet, idiot. He's fixing to cut your head off. David said, I'll do it. I'll go. And he took a sling. That's all he had. And he picked up some rocks. That was all available. And he did what he did under the anointing of Holy God. That's all you and I need to do. You know the rest of that story. Start where you are. Use what you have. Do it in his name. That's all you have to do. You don't have to worry about victory. You don't have to worry about wins and losses. Start where you are. Use what you have. Do it for his glory. So I don't know much. You don't have to know much. I don't have the education. You don't have to have education. Are you listening to what I'm telling you? Start where you are. You don't think God knows where you are? Sure he does. Use what you have. What has God given you? I promise you, God has given you something that no one else has the ability to do. You may not think it's much. There is someone or some someones that you come in contact with in your life that nobody has the impact which you do. And you may not know who they are. The problem is, if you're not willing to start where you are and use what you have, you will never see what you can do for his glory. Isn't that true? All right. Well, we're out of time. Well, we're not quite out of time. We got 7 minutes, so, that's almost out of time.